Angela Davis appeared on Skip Gates' show where he searches people's genealogy, and boy, was she stunned by what he found. Let's roll this.
Any idea what you're looking at? That is a list of the passengers on the Mayflower.
No, I can't believe this. No, my ancestors did not come here on the Mayflower.
Your ancestors came on the Mayflower.
No.
You are descended
No.
from one of the 101 people who sailed on the Mayflower.
Oof. That's a little bit too much to deal with right now.
Did you ever, in your wildest dreams, think that you may have descended from people who laid
Never.
the foundation
Never.
for this country?
Never.
Amazing clip. It's easy to see why it went viral. And Henry Louis Gates' show on PBS, I think it's called Finding Your Roots, occasionally has a moment like this. He discovered Angela Davis is a distant relative of William Brewster, one of, as Gates said there, the Puritans to arrive on the Mayflower. He was fleeing persecution, religious persecution, drama, one of the major sort of founders of the Plymouth Bay colony. And so there are a number of different ways that I think people can kind of interpret what this means about America, what it means about Angela Davis, et cetera. One of the things that always strikes me when these types of situations arise is kind of the rape culture associated with slavery. Because now there were free blacks in New England, from the 1700s on. So it is certainly within the realm of possibility that there was some type of relationship that was not rape that produced this, but that possibility is extraordinarily slim. Most likely, you're talking about somehow you wind up in a situation of slavery that produces this type of outcome, and that because that is where most of the where most of those family trees intersected. No, absolutely, and you can imagine then why. Actually, it shouldn't be that surprising to Angela Davis, and I'm sure it was just sort of the shock of the moment because she's obviously very well aware of that history. Also, it's the Mayflower. It's the Mayflower. It's the icon of like colonization and exploration and America and everything. Yeah, which is, again, why it's easy to see that it went viral. I wanted to ask you, Ryan, about the significance of Angela Davis, obviously on the left. The right, as she sort of makes her college campus appearances, et cetera, the right, myself included, will weigh in on that and ask, these lavish speaking fees that come to Angela Davis, who was once on the FBI's most wanted list for her role in a very complicated situation back in the 70s. And ended up going to jail and then being acquitted. So Angela Davis's role in the contemporary left and Henry Louis Gates Jr., by the way, was involved in the beer summit, the famous beer summit that everyone seems to have forgotten about in the Obama administration, where he accused a white Boston cop basically of racially profiling him as he was trying to break into his own house. Which he did, right? I don't know. I think that's still an open question as to whether it was like malicious racial profiling, but Obama then brought the officer and Henry Louis Gates to the White House for the beer summit, and Angela Davis, going back to her, as we're now involved in this DEI, what people call wokeness, cancel culture discussion, is there a significance to Angela Davis being the person here who's learning about the William Brewster Plymouth colony relationship? Sure. I mean, she is an iconic and also polarizing figure on the left. The specific crime that she was accused of. So basically, somebody tried to break a couple guys out of prison in California and used weapons that Angela Davis had purchased, and that the assailant died, other people died, like became an atrocity, and Angela Davis was then arrested for buying the guns that were used. Right. But an all-white jury actually acquitted her, although she spent, I think, more than a year kind of in jail between the charges and the trial, and her then being found not guilty. Obviously, the FBI was cracking down on Black Panthers and leftists at the time, and this was a part of that.
And from there, she went on to be one of the more kind of celebrated writers and academics on the left over the years, imbued with an enormous amount of moral authority. Fell into more controversy over the last several years when, if you remember, a Birmingham Jewish organization gave her some lifetime award and then rescinded it, saying that her views on Israel, she's supportive of the boycott of Israel, made it so that they no longer wanted her to get this award, and so then that produced a lot of backlash, saying that that it's unfair to call her an anti-Semite just because of her position on Israeli abuses towards Palestinians. But she has maintained her cultural cachet for sure. So to have somebody with who has been part of our culture for 50 years, to learn that she came from the Mayflower is pretty amazing.
Well, then let's put the next element up on the screen, because I think this was a good take from Michael Brendan Doherty of National Review. So a take coming from the right that wasn't just, owning the libs. He said, think about it from both perspectives. Almost certainly exploitation played its role, but someone who came on the Mayflower has a radical like Angela Davis as a descendant. America is huge. Talk of divorce is senseless in light of this reality. Obviously, I think the reason this clip popped on the right is because there's a lot of momentum that seeks to hold people accountable for the sins of their ancestors because of the color of their skin right now. So that is white Americans who are being held accountable or want to be, the argumentation goes, or should be held accountable, as the argument goes, for the sins of previous white Americans. This complicates that. Obviously, when exploitation, obviously, as Doherty says there, may have played a role, yes. But then, on the other hand, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't, and that makes it a very difficult sort of reality. The reality is much more complicated and in some ways much more beautiful in that American sense that William Brewster, the line from William Brewster to Angela Davis is sort of thoroughly American, that, you can descend from the lineage of somebody who founded the Plymouth colony and be a sort of Black radical, and someone who's allowed to have, rightfully, who has fought for all of these different metrics of progress for Black Americans, et cetera, et cetera.
But I think we'd have to know a lot more to say whether or not it's complicated, because if it is what we assume, and he says exploitation, he's talking about rape. You wouldn't say that the product of a rape, bears any responsibility or any kind of culpability or even relationship to the power structures that produced that.
No, right? But that's the thing. Like, we don't know, and sort of trying to categorically say we do know is a problem.
Right, but we can certainly make a very educated guess.
Oh, absolutely.
Of how that.
But then codifying things legally into policy, I think, is a really different question.
Right, which shows why it would be better, I think, to produce a social democratic society that elevated everybody. Yeah. Rather than saying, well, we're going to go back, 400 years and figure out whether there was consent between these ancestors to determine whether you are going to get some form of reparations. That just falls apart pretty quickly. Let's go back to the Skip Gates thing real quick, because it'd be one thing if the cop, and this was July 2009. He came back from a trip. He couldn't find his keys. He's trying to get into his house.
Right.
He's in Cambridge. It'd be one thing if the cop stops him, is rude to him, asks him, who are you, and kind of gets aggressive. You could say, look, that was, let's do the protect and serve thing. Let's not be hostile with people until we know what's going on. But they went further. They put the guy in cuffs and arrested him.
Well, he started arguing and saying, do you know, like basically, I don't think you know who you're messing with. Yeah, which is understandable, again, because he's going into his own house.
And he's Henry Louis Gates.
Yeah, and this is the Cambridge police. I think I said earlier Boston, but Cambridge police. Speaking of Plymouth and the settling of Massachusetts, here you have, this is happening in Cambridge, Harvard professor, Cambridge cop, and
he's an old man too. It's like you can't ask a neighbor, "Hey, is this actually Henry Louis Gates Jr.?" You can't type it in your phone.
And so, and you can understand entirely why Henry Louis Gates Jr. would be furious that, and would be, this is one of the things I think the right got wrong about the kind of beer summit discourse back in 2009, is that you can understand why somebody of his age who has lived through the America that he's lived through would be on guard and would sort of have that reflexive upset over being treated that way on his own porch by a cop. That doesn't mean the cop was acting in a racist fashion necessarily, but you can understand why Gates would jump to that conclusion.
And I'm not saying this is how he felt, but there's also a sense of survivor's guilt among a lot of people who escape oppression and escape a marginal circumstance and get to Cambridge, get to an endowed professorship, get to a place where you're on speaking terms with presidents, while so many people that you grew up with are still living in these brutal conditions. And so I think that kind of cuts against somebody like Gates's willingness to kind of bow down to an officer who is treating him in that way, because he feels like, I've made a lot of compromises to get where I am, but I'm going to stand up for myself on my own porch.
I think it's really interesting that this is on his show and with Angela Davis, because it's a good reminder from the beer summit to from the arc of early Obama years to Biden years now, that our media discourse has done the entire country basically a disservice by just erasing any nuance from these really complicated conversations. And I think that's had had negative effects for both sides of the debate, whether or not you think one side is right or wrong. Ultimately, it's just what's wrong is the lack of seriousness and nuance that our media culture in the age of Twitter, which was very new in 2009, has brought to these conversations, because we're forced to make snap judgments for the algorithm. We're not forced to, but people do make snap judgments for the algorithm to be involved in the discourse as quickly as they possibly can. And that brings us to, I think, a totally flattened dialogue about that.
And I do think on the question of how this complicates things, it also has to complicate the mythology of the Mayflower. Like it has to remind people that what they learned in third grade about that landing has many other layers to it that have combined to produce the fabric of this society.
I think the schools have definitely moved in that direction to the point of perhaps overreach, which we would probably disagree on at this point. But again, we don't actually know where down the line exploitation, if that was the case, occurred. It could have been, it's really hard to know. But fascinating reminder of how unique this country is. There are more cases like this, and you could say unique in a bad way, but I think the way of looking at it that I prefer, the Michael Brendan Doherty way, is to say there are people who legitimately were white supremacists from another age who have paved the way for the Angela Davises of the world.
Well, that's for sure.
All right, we'll be back with more counterpoints after this.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Sagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.